Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about two things. The first being Canadian truckers, and the second being the latest Megan Basham article over at the Daily Wire. So that's the two things we're going to be talking about, and really, it's the same story. So that's why we're going to be talking about this in one video. And one of the things I'll be using is an article that will be published on Evangelical Dark Web, written by my brother. And that is about we need pastors to be more like Canadian truckers. And that's to say we need them to be more like Canadian truckers than they are right now. Because the current state of the pastorate is one of effeminacy. And that is the key issue here. Whereas in Canada, it's a left-wing country. It is completely left-wing fascism up there. Which fascism is always left-wing, by the way. So with that said, when you look at Canada, they have 5 political parties, all left-wing, vying for power. And you got to wonder whether there's a disaffected, disenfranchised, substantial proportion of the population that is conservative or right-wing, or at very least not left-wing, that cannot operate within the political system because it's so left-wing. They have 5 left-wing parties. But they can organize a substantial movement, however late in the game, to fight back against Trudeau and his government. So that's a pretty remarkable thing. And, I've looked into a lot of organizations being LARPs. I've talked about how these movements are LARPs, like the March for Life is a LARP. I've talked about, the one protest, the J6 protest or whatever, how that was a LARP or a Fed post or whatever. So I've talked a lot about how organizations and protest movements are disingenuous. And here's why the Freedom Convoy is not. Here's why they're not a LARP. They went down there over the weekend and they stayed. If they had just gone down there on a Saturday and then went back to their homes, that's a LARP. They're not serious if they do that. But instead, the honking will continue until freedom improves. That seems to be the case. And now they're shutting down border crossings and stuff like that. It's beautiful to see. Wreck Canada. Wreck them. So that's a huge development. And this is the most substantial of the protest movements, I would say, since the Australian protest movements. It's pretty substantial. Credit where credit is due to the Canadian truckers. And I think the reason why this hasn't caught on in America is first, we do have a sporadic, the whole federalism does allow some states to be freer than others. So that much is going in America's favor. However, the blue states, there's just no real movement there. There's not a real movement there. And it's partially why I'm running for local office, is because there's not a real movement there. Now, counteract this with this Megan Basham article titled "How the Federal Government Used Evangelical Leaders to Spread COVID Propaganda to Churches." Now, this is written by Megan Basham. She is one of the best reporters over at Daily Wire because she actually reports on issues that I talk about in terms of, the evangelical dark web niche. She broadcasts a lot of what I would write about to a much larger platform. I mean, this is a Daily Wire. It's not exactly a huge conservative hub, but as far as clickservatism goes, they are on top. They're on top. And I don't visit the Daily Wire often, and when I did, I just saw that they're advertising a bunch of articles written by Dan Crenshaw. Are you kidding me? This is what passes for conservative media? But I digress. But Megan Basham is unabashedly one of the good ones over at Daily Wire. It's good that they have some Christian presence there because they kind of don't. Between Andrew Klavan, Matt Walsh, who I've heard articulate a false gospel, and I don't know. I assume Michael Knowles is just Catholic, so that doesn't mean much. So with that said, it's good that they have some Christian writers over at Daily Wire. Megan Basham, huge shout out for this article. And just to look into this article, it's basically just she lays the wood on Ed Stetzer, Francis Collins, the Gospel Coalition, Christianity Today. She goes after all these people, Rick Warren even, because she's been following, she's downstream from Evangelical Dark Web, but she has a much larger platform. Because here's the thing, the Evangelical Dark Web, small audience, right? But, we're upstream. The stream gets bigger and bigger and bigger and larger and larger and larger as it heads towards the ocean. That's how rivers work. So she's downstream from me and able to broadcast this to a large audience. And Daily Wire, credit where credit is due, they blasted this article. Thank you, Ben Shapiro, for that one. Even though I don't like Ben Shapiro, I do thank him for elevating this article and not burying it, because this was a job well done by Megan Basham, who just took Ed Stetzer to the woodshed, took Francis Collins to the woodshed, and a bunch of other people. It's a beautiful piece. I recommend you read it. And it just talks about how how churches just gobbled that propaganda up. They promoted the Great Reset. They promoted Branch Covidianism. Hardcore. And it's because, and it goes into how this happened. Because they supported people like Francis Collins. Even though Francis Collins is a theological liberal, I believe he's a theistic evolutionist, which is theological liberalism, by the way. There is not a biblically conservative way to come to the conclusion of theistic evolution. That does not exist. It does not exist in Scripture. So, with that said, also I believe it talks about Tim Keller, speaking of theistic evolution. So this article just goes to town. I appreciate that. And it's the same story as the one written at Evangelical Dark Web that's not published yet, so I'm not going to show it. But it's about pastors are just weak. They're effeminate. These blue-collar workers, and it juxtaposes white-collar and blue-collar, that pastors have become too white-collar, that they're distant, that, they're not rugged, and how truckers, blue collar, hardworking, manual labor, stuff like that, and how, the callous of their hands makes them more callous to what the world thinks, whereas the pastors, soft hands, soft minds, and too effeminate for the times. Malakos is the biblical word for it, if we want to get down to the Koine Greek. And malakos is correctly translated as effeminate in the New Testament, particularly in 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9 and 10, where it talks about effeminacy. So with that said, that's the issue in the church right now. We have a lot of effeminate people in the pastorate. And here's one reason why there's a lot of effeminate pastors, is that these people do not have any other skill sets. They don't have any other marketable skills. They could not make it in the private sector, so they're very desperate to keep their cushy, white-collar job of being a social media influencer and or motivational speaker. Whereas the trucker has to work for a living, and they recognize that we have the power here to shut the entire thing down to affect the culture in the way that we want to. Whereas the pastor won't even keep his church open when the government says you can't keep your church open without even specifying any consequences yet. It's pathetic. So here's another example that's brought up in the Evangelical Dark Web article, is the Atlas Gym guy. He's running for Congress in the New Jersey 3rd District. And it's a winnable seat, according to him, and I trust his analysis. That seat is winnable in New Jersey. New Jersey is not known for having a conservative in office. It is not like the NJ GOP is worse than the Maryland GOP, because at least the Maryland GOP has some celebratory conservative figures, but New Jersey, no way. You guys got Chris Christie and some rhinos in Congress, if anything. But he's running for Congress, and it's a winnable seat. And he kept his church open, and I believe, suffered some criminal penalty or not church. He kept his gym open, whereas the pastors wouldn't keep their churches open. They wouldn't, they counted the cost and said, obedience isn't worth it, bro. So we're dealing with the same story of truckers, blue collar workers are willing to stand up. The beauty salon parlors are willing to stand up, thinking of Shelley Luther out there in Texas. I believe that's Dallas Fort Worth, Texas. But the pastors, by and large, are not. That's a problem in America. And, maybe we need more bivocational pastors. I don't know what exactly the solution is to cure the effeminacy behind our pulpits. So that's the issue in our culture. We need to look to ways to solve it. And, I have a lot more to say about that, but not really in tonight's video. So with that said, I'm going to close out right here. If you like the kind of content that I'm producing, subscribe to the Evangelical Dark Web. That's the least you can do. And also check out evangelicaldarkweb.org. Articles practically every day. Beautiful articles. Not all of them make the video cut. Particularly, I got another article on a church that's leaving the SBC. So you want to stick around for that. And you can also support Evangelical Dark Web, this ministry, over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. It's a Patreon-like system over there. And you can support us in that way as well. My name's Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web, and I will catch you on the next one.